evening. Thank you for coming once again. I'm only using the microphone because we're being recorded. If you intend to speak this evening and you come up, please talk into the microphone because we want to make sure we get as many comments as we can. And since we'll begin, turn it over to Dan Howard.
Okay, I'm going to stoop over. So thanks, Dale. Tonight, our intention is to continue on with our investigation of the current situation in terms of our comprehensive plan. In this case tonight, we're focused on the zoning code, and primarily our shopping centers and how they relate to our zoning. So we're going to go over the draft commercial center analysis that Code Studio provided, and we're going to do that by listening to a presentation that Lee put together that will take you through the memo to kind of understand what he did to put it together and what it's intended to accomplish. We'll talk a little bit about the memo and try to answer any questions you might have, or just suggest to you that our plan is for you to have some time to look at this over the course of the next month, and we're going to revisit this again next month and possibly have an activity associated with that later next month at our regularly scheduled meeting time. I just wanted to go back and provide some context. I don't know if this is coming through up there?
There's a mute switch in and on.
Yeah, that's all good. I just think it's too far down for me. Is that better? Yeah, sorry about that. Okay. So, just to give you a little bit of context in where we are, this isn't going to work on here. That's a good thing to know. You know, we're into task number 4 here. We've worked on the project initiation activities. We went through those in March. We had the comp plan analysis last month that you went through, the public outreach plan. I would tell you that both were posted to the website within a few days after your meeting. And to date, I have not received any comments on either one of those products. So, nothing yet. We're not sure what that tells us, but they're still there and they're available for folks to read and comment on. Tonight, we're gonna go through the analysis of the existing centers and think a little bit about what our zoning says about those centers, where the opportunities might be for us to change the zoning or think about changes to the zoning ordinance. This is really part of our inventory, get familiar with the territory, G2 kind of activity that we're on right now for those former military people. And we're going to work this over the next month or so. So we've got a meeting at the end of June. We'll continue to work with this memo. Dal will talk a little bit about what we may be doing next month to support that analysis. Somewhere in between June and August, we'll probably receive another product, which will be a draft outline for the zoning code that the consultant puts together. It's simply a draft. It's a suggestion as to how the code might be altered and structured to meet some of the objectives that we have. And that is all leading into a discussion with the town board in early September regarding the direction that the consultant has derived from these activities and the consideration that you have of the information you've been provided so far. And what he's going to be looking for is for the town board to say, you know what, we're comfortable with where you're going with this project. We're comfortable with what you're telling us about the situation out there. Let's go forward. And the reason we want to do that is because the charrette activity, the public input activity that we have, which is described in the second memo you got this month, the 4-2, Part 2, will be a pretty intensive activity, and it's certainly a very resource-intensive activity. So before we engage in that, we want to make sure that we're headed down the right road and that everybody, the planning board as the key agent in this, and the town board are aware of where we're going and how we intend to proceed from there. So, any questions about where we're at and where we're going over the next couple of months? Okay.
Can we back up one step, Dan?
Yep.
You said you're still looking for...
This is, by the way, sorry, this is the same diagram that's in your book. in section 3, just so you know.
We're
But
still looking for comments on the stuff we looked at last month, which was...
looking for comments from you, any comments that we might get from folks out there that might want to look at that information and provide some input on it. I will tell you, we're gonna need to wrap it up fairly soon, and the reason for that is because we'd like to kind of move on from that, provide that information to NYSERDA as part of their piece to this, but in no way will it be final. It can be talked about, discussed, and altered as we go along if we need
Before
to.
next meeting?
Yeah, I'd like to, if you have any comments, I'd like to have them before the next meeting, absolutely. Anything else? Okay. So, task 4.2 is the commercial center zoning analysis. The intent is here to conduct a review of the existing zoning districts applied to our planned commercial centers. Our centers in the comprehensive plan, if you recall, are arrayed in a scalar fashion in size from regional to community, neighborhood, and traditional. Remember, we talked a little bit about that last month. And investigate the potential of new districts and provisions in our zoning that might be required to implement the comprehensive plan. Now, again, I don't want to get crossed up here. Our intent here is to look at the comprehensive plan, understand what the plan says about commercial development in the town and the commercial centers that we have established in the town as the policy framework for any changes to zoning that might come after that. So zoning is what we use to implement the plan. It's what we do to legislate the land use in the town and what gets developed where and to what extent. But that's generally guided by the comprehensive plan. So if you'll recall the comprehensive plan from last month, we talked a little bit about this, sets out an array of land uses across the town that are envisioned by the community through the planning process. And what we're doing here is we're taking a look at the way these are arrayed, but primarily we're looking at the way they're described and structured, so that when we say this particular area might be best served by a traditional commercial node, say the Harlem, Maine, that means that it has certain characteristics and scale to it. And so the plan tries to establish that scalar kind of arrangement, but as we found last month in our discussion of Lee's memo, in some ways it's deficient. And so part of the first task we have is to try and address the deficiencies in the plan. And only when we do that can we get into the zoning, right? And the zoning will tell people how to develop the property specifically. We're just trying to get the policy and the places and the types determined right now. So that makes sense? Everybody? Any questions on that? Because sometimes it's not clear, the relationship between the plan and the zoning. And actually, we may talk a little bit about that a little later. So that's what task 4.2 is in the commercial center analysis. I'm going to ask Kim to come up here and we'll fire this up. And what you're going to see now is a presentation by Lee Einsweiler. He's going to go through the memo, so it's not real interesting stuff, but it's meant to orient you to the memo and the intent that he had when he put the memo together.
Thank you, Dan. So what you see before you is the first part of this memo. Our office felt the process portion, which has been extracted as the second part, was getting buried in the analysis portion, which is why these became two memos. So this big analysis piece is the product of some review of the existing zoning district and some significant mapping, which has gone on, unfortunately, only in the last couple of days. So we've just barely gotten a real handle on this. But what we have to share with you should help you to help us figure out which sites to use as pilot sites when we are preparing new zoning. I'm going to walk you through this memo, and then I'm going to kind of summarize at the end again what we're hoping you can do with this material. So what you have here right now, it starts with this introductory piece. There's not terribly much to that. And it moves right into a review of your existing zoning district. So that piece is a somewhat limited review in the sense that it is looking principally at the question of whether the existing districts implement the kinds of mixed-use and commercial center ideas that are in the plan today. So we've asked ourselves in terms of this table that you're seeing, whether each of the town's current zoning districts that are used in center areas whether they allow for mixed uses, whether they have the kinds of standards that generate walkability, like pulling buildings up to the street, parking to the side or rear, streetscaping areas, wide sidewalks. And the final one is whether the district would allow a compact or dense form of development. And what you're seeing, this is the same key as last month's memo. So what you're seeing is the black dots are good and the clear dots are bad and the others are sort of halfway in between. So you'll see that there's actually land area been used in the centers for low-density residential purposes. Would one anticipate those to change over time? Perhaps, but it is a little bit exotic to have, especially suburban agriculture, little scattered pieces of that embedded there. You'll see that almost none of the districts, until you get to the T&D district, really have the full spectrum of tools to make sure that we get compact mixed-use places with high-quality development standards. The closest today is the one sort of more frequently used, the GB district, which, as many of you know, is not exactly a perfect district for implementing mixed use, and has not really generated a whole lot of mixed use in the town. So each of these then are just little summaries of each of the sets of districts so that you can get our insights as to why we were saying what we said in that initial table. They talk you through the idea of the zoning district and whether it could successfully implement mixed-use places in the future. Following that is a description of some other pieces of today's zoning ordinance that really actually help you or hurt you on the mixed-use front. So there are some contextual standards, meaning standards which are measured in relation to the existing environment that you're in. So they're measured based on where your lot is. They're not a generic standard that applies necessarily everywhere. So the first one is a front setback averaging option. There is a height transition tool in the current rules, although it does substantially flatten out buildings and would require very significant building separation in the future between buildings. One real key is the alternative parking plan, which has allowed applicants to negotiate with staff to generate specific parking regulations for their property. That's probably really been helping them. Then one of the final pieces that we noted here is that in a desire to preserve right-of-way, there is a setback measured from major roadways in the town. It is measured from the center line and ensures that no matter what the district that applies to that area is, you're going to get buildings set well back from the roadway. This may well need revisiting at the same time that we are relooking at some of the other questions about how these areas get zoned in the future. But you don't want the district, on the one hand, pulling the building up to the street and that standard pushing it back. The next piece includes a discussion of what we consider some of the key elements of what new zoning should do for these centers and mixed-use activity areas. And you can read these on your own. I'm not really going to go through them, but we covered the questions of use and of urban form. We covered some other elements in sort of a list fashion down here. The public realm, meaning the streets and the sidewalks, are covered, and then transitions to adjacent development, which are the best to use, which are the least effective to use. How the new zoning needs to be thought about in its implementation, especially with regard to phasing of development, a critical idea where you have redevelopment happening, but you have income being generated on the property already. How do you redevelop and keep that income coming while you're building a new building, for example? And then how to treat nonconformities. If we happen to change up the rules and people are no longer conforming, how are we going to make sure that in the future we are dealing with those effectively? The next piece of the memo, and this is really your significant homework here, is thinking about how to test the new code concepts. And next fall, we're going to run an exercise. It's further described in that Part 2 memo that you have there, and I'll talk you through that one in a moment. But we're going to run an exercise where we're actually in town with some urban designers looking at specific sites throughout the community that provide us with a good test bed for understanding whether the kinds of rules we're anticipating really work in the Amherst environment. And we would do that through a variety of 3D modeling and 2D block studies, meaning drawings of building footprints and parking layouts that show that they actually fit into specific sites. So in thinking about the ranking of these sites, we want you to think about 3 key things. One is we are looking for sites where the disconnect between the current zoning and the future vision for the areas as defined in the comp plan is the most severe. Where the comp plan seems to be saying the right thing and the zoning is doing what the comp plan wants. For example, regional commercial implemented by the city's shopping center district, which is a regional commercial model for development. Maybe that's not the place we really want to work on. Maybe we want to work on a place that, one thing says is regional and everything that we understand about it says it's just a neighborhood area. And so we actually have some kind of disconnect. The second component of what we'd like you to think about, and I know that some of you have expertise in this area, is the likelihood of redevelopment. Part of that has to do with age of development, but part of it also has to do with quality of construction. You can have relatively new construction at sort of low cost that maybe is easier to replace than old construction that was done really well and probably should just be rehabilitated. So this whole question of the new zoning needs to generate new buildings sometime soon. So we want to look for those test bed areas to be areas where we can expect that the new zoning could spark activity. The final idea is really transferability. So a one-off location might be a bit problematic. There might be a special need for us to look at some specific area in town, but how much better would it be if we looked at areas that we could try the zoning out on 3 years later when we found we're quite comfortable with it, then go apply it to 7 or 10 other sites. That would be the most powerful kind of thing. So that the notion that the sites we recommend might be transferable in the future is probably important. We've recommended to you, but this is not the be-all and end-all. You're allowed to second guess on this. But we recommended, we're looking for some types of sites, and we're not using that functional classification that the plan uses of regional, community, neighborhood. Rather, we're looking at some of these characteristics of specific areas They might match up to that functional classification, but they might not. So one of the ideas is we should be testing some deep, large parcel areas where large footprint buildings go. Because there isn't all that much of that in the town, and it will always be the best place to put large redevelopment options. Shallow corridor parcels. You have shallow corridors all over the town. So help us find, again, that one that would redevelop the most easily, that's ready to go if we would just pull the switch and get the zoning exactly right for it. Williamsville Edge. Certainly the discussion of the Hyatt in town recently has generated a need to talk about the edge parcels, especially between the freeway and the village of Williamsville. How should those be zoned? But both ends of Main Street have their own issues and may well be worth discussion. Then there are some of the traditional nodes. These are the traditional business areas, Eggertsville, Snyder, etc. Help us pick, again, the one where we could be the most effective if we got new zoning in place. And then a new suburban node. Some of those examples are, I've talked about here about Clearfield and Dodge and Hopkins Road. These are the centers which are going in a completely auto-oriented pattern, in spite of the fact they're sort of intended to be neighborhood serving. So is there work we could be doing on one of those where there could be some infill or redevelopment? And finally, it seems as though, and this is again a topic for discussion because it's a little bit outside of our work scope, but it seems as though you have places which are dominated by office. And in those places, the market is likely to change over the next 10 years or so. We're seeing it change in other communities already. And we ought to be thinking about how can we surgically improve these office park areas so that they continue to be functional on into the future. So those are some things to kind of give you the concept of what you would be talking about here. I want to show you, I think we'll go up to full page view here, and I want to show you some of the other elements that we've attached here. So first is some work that was done by the town. This is the current version of a conceptual land use plan for the town, and you'll see it's annotated with a bunch of little numbers. Those are all little center numbers, and on the following 3 pages, you have a very nice table prepared by staff that gives you the name of the center, it gives you the kinds of building square footage that's there, the typical depths of the lot, the kinds of front setbacks you'll find. So a lot of meat about those areas, but probably especially important for those of you who may not spend all of your time looking all around town at commercial centers, is there's sort of the name of the center itself. There's also the name of some of the anchor businesses that might be located there, just to help orient you if you're having trouble with that issue. Then we put in a little bit of analysis done in our shop here. These are the same centers that you just saw. They have
Lee, can you blow that map up just a little bit as you're talking about it?
I sure can. So these are the centers that we'll just have a look here. This is the center range that is provided in the comprehensive plan: regional, community, neighborhood, traditional center. So all this is coloring those in so that you can start to see which centers are designated what. And if ever there were a time to second guess ourselves on these designations, it would be during the course of this exercise. So for example, this darkest red is regional. And here's a piece of land that's a designated center, happens to sit between Williamsville and the freeway, but you got to ask yourself, since it's freeway served like these, is it regional in character? And should we be thinking about this perhaps in a different way in that functional classification? That's one map. The next map is the mixed-use activity centers designated in the plan today. university-related, highway intersection, special use, urban village. So these are a variety of places around town. These ones, I believe, are accurately classified because they were specifically designated as these sort of mixed-use centers. But again, is there a different and better way that we could begin to classify these over time? And finally, we thought we might take the staff's map of height, take that maximum building height that we were seeing in the range, and apply it to the town. So this is height in stories. That's what the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is. So we have kind of grouped these together. So 1 and 2 are together, 3 and 4 are together, 5 and 6 are together, and then there's 10. Yes, you do have a 10-story building in town. So this is the map that shows you by the center where that height of buildings is. In fact, I was kind of fascinated by it because the large parcels here on Niagara Falls Boulevard and the large parcels on Transit Road do not necessarily have the height. The height is here near the interstate, no surprise there, and a little bit here. So, interesting question, you know, is height a component of this discussion that we should be talking about? I do want to say, while we're looking at this town-wide, it's probably important, and staff consistently reminds me, to remember that Amherst is part of a regional system of commerce here that includes the other side of Niagara Falls Boulevard, the other side in Clarence of Transit Road, and activity that lies, you know, outside the town's boundaries, including, you know, in downtown in Williamsville. And so, don't forget to sort of think about Amherst's role in the region and whether it's going to continue to serve that role on into the future. Help us do some of that thinking about the comprehensive planning that gets us there. So then the only other piece that's in here is for each of those centers, and we've accumulated the centers from the staff's memo, we've prepared an aerial photo and a zoning map. And these are, they match each other. And what this will allow you to do is just get some sense when you're looking at things about what's going on, you know, what's in there, how big are those setbacks, how much green area is there, are there a bunch of little buildings, or are they all a bunch of big buildings? It just gives you a chance to orient yourself with the aerial photo and then be able to look directly down and see what the zoning was. Oh, motor services, okay. Oh, that was probably a bunch of gas stations in there, you know, or a, you know, lube joint or a muffler shop, whatever. So it's pretty easy to work with these. There's a whole set of these, and they run through the, I believe, 55 identified small areas that are in the staff's list. 56, sorry. At the tail end of that, and I'll show you this whole page first, and then we'll go back and look at it smaller. At the tail end of that is a summary that goes with the maps above it, where each of these places is grouped. And I'm going to blow this up and try and turn it around for you. Each of these now, we have the center number, and then each of the zoning districts that make up that center, so the total center area, remember that we have accumulated a series of centers in some cases because they're all in one area. The staff has got those pulled out separately in that first information, the first big table, but we've agglomerated it here. So you're seeing the total center area, you know, right here, center that includes 26 and 27 is one of the biggest, 350 acres of area in that one. But altogether, you're looking at about 2,400 acres of land in these centers. GB zoning is 1/3 of that total area. No real surprise there. I believe the next largest is shopping center. These are the regional centers, and office business. And equal amount of each of those. And then a substantial amount of multifamily, MFR 5. So this is just a way for you guys to have a little bit of detail about what's going on in each of these centers, so that you can have a good conversation between people who are quite familiar with it and people who are not really so familiar with it, about what size they are, what zoning has been applied, and then you can help us think about which should become the target areas for looking at in the fall charrette. So that's a great segue to the second memo, the little skinny one that you have there. So in the second memo, we're really just covering this process for how we would begin the preparation of the plan amendment and new zoning. So we propose to use a public participation design workshop. We're calling it here a charrette because that's just the term our firm uses. We can call it anything we want. Some people are offended by the term charrette, but for the moment at least, that's what we've called it. We've described each of the components of how the charrette might work. And then we've talked a little bit about how the material would be reviewed after that, including a tiny little bit of closing about how it goes through the official adoption process. But probably the most interesting piece for today, to get kind of a quick look at it, is this example that I've included from a charrette we're about to do starting in a couple of days. So you see that we would be up there for about a week. We show up on Friday. On Saturday morning, we hold a workshop with the general public, usually in a space that is near one of the centers that we're working on, and a space that is easily accessible to the public and highly visible if possible. Something like a storefront works really well. We then are working in our design studio for the remainder of the week and ending with a work-in-progress presentation on that Wednesday night. However, a key part of this is feedback loops. And so this open design studio is open to the public, and we would be running technical meetings throughout those days. And those technical meetings would include people like the IDA and the rest of you who are in the room. They would include town staff. They might include the town staff that are not involved there today, like people involved with streets or parks or other elements that we might be talking about. Might include talking to DOT, might include talking to the adjacent communities of Clarence and Tonawanda, for example. Those technical meetings help inform what you're seeing. By Monday night, we have taken the ideas from Saturday morning, and we're able to have a drop-in open house where people can just walk through the studio space. We'll have pinned up everything we're working on. We'll print everything out. We'll hang up all the tracing paper. We'll show all the drawings off. And we can walk people through sort of how these things work and where we see this going. The two lunch and learns, in this case, happen to be about historic districts and form-based codes. Ours could easily be a session on the ideas for the comprehensive plan and a session on the ideas for the form-based codes. They're usually done as brown bag lunches, again, in our space, just inviting the community in to share in the expertise of the group during those two experiences. So this is kind of what the charrette week looks like. Down below that, you'll see an example of what the backside of that page might look like, in which we kind of describe those to people and give people the addresses and the times and all of that. The reason that we show you this piece, and especially this early on, we do actually have charrette dates. I believe the Saturday is that the 23rd, Dan, of September?
Yeah, hang on a second.
I'm looking too.
Yeah, I'm pulling my calendar up.
Saturday is the 24th.
There it is, 24th, that's.
So this would be Saturday the 24th of September through the following Wednesday. We want all of you to begin to help us help people understand how they can get engaged in this and how important it is to be talking with us about this and providing their insight. This is not a project in which the consultant team nor the town staff is really ready to tell you or the public at large how this all should pan out. In fact, we want to work our way there in a very transparent, open way that includes these kinds of public sessions, includes putting our material on the web as quickly as we can, includes taking in, everybody's insight. So we want you thinking about who needs to be blocking out these times in their schedule so that they can join us in the fall and help us with this. This is when we'll be working live with actual real places. And it will be some of the most interesting and most exciting time as part of this process. Many people feel the rules are kind of the dry ho-hum after that. So this is where all the visualization will occur. So with that, I wonder, Dan, is there anything you feel we missed covering?
No. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of idea where that information came from and what that information that you received in the packet over the weekend is intended to do. It was not intended for us to work our way through this tonight. The idea was to give you a good introduction from the consultant, ask you to spend the next couple weeks going through it at your leisure, and we'll talk in much greater detail and think about ways to maybe operationalize some of these concepts in June. And so that's what I have. Dal, did you? No, sorry. Yeah, Dave.
Trying to identify candidate types for some of the studies. What's the process that you plan to go through to pick those?
We'll talk more about that next month. I mean, I think the thing to do right now is just kind of think about what he said. Take some time. I know most of you just got this within the last few days. There's no expectation that you'll have gone through it and be prepared to do much with it tonight, except kind of understand a little bit more about how it was developed. And we will go through that process of looking at these sites in a little more detail, try to understand what some of these concepts are that he's talking about look like on the ground. The photographs are nice, but we may take an opportunity to go out and take a look at some of these and get a first-hand look at what it means, what the front setback really means, how many stories and how it relates to the property behind it, those kinds of situations, just to give you some insight on that. So we'll have more information about that in the next couple of weeks. Frank.
So the site selected for the charrette, be multiple sites, right?
Yes.
Okay, because my experience has been in homeowner associations that unless it affects the people in the immediate area, they're not interested. So I'd be interested to know which ones I've picked out.
And we'll know which ones are picked out long before the charrette actually takes place. And you'll notice in there, I think he identified 5 or 6 different types as he went through in the memo. Our intent is to try and pick up one of each of those and look at each type as we go along. Alan?
Room to add.
Sorry?
Type.
I don't know. We're already pushing it at 6. If you look at the contract. I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes.
Could we possibly get an expanded copy of the key? Maybe everyone else is completely familiar with what color is what,
Mhm.
but it would help me a lot going through these other pictures and have kind of a visual reminder of what
Sure.
code is here.
Sure.
I mean, code,
Yep. So what I would caution you on, however, is this. The map that you just held up is the comprehensive plan. It's a land use plan. The maps that he has in the document are actually zoning maps. Now, the colors generally mean the same thing, but not necessarily one-to-one. So we owe you that. We'll get you a key on the colors for the zoning map.
Okay. Gary? Any good speak? All right.
Very good. So,
I was going to do that after you.
Okay. It's very interesting. We had an extensive meeting this morning with staff, and it's very interesting. When you look at all this and you listen to all this, you think we have to reinvent the wheel. And you think that we're going to have such an effect on the zoning that everything that we do in this committee is going to be incumbent upon each one of you to be able to make valid decisions about something that's going to take place now and going to the future in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And I'm not sure that we're really portraying it the right way. I'd like to get you guys more engaged. We've only had 2 meetings, I understand that, okay? But at the same time, if you don't really understand what we're trying to do, or if you have questions on what we're trying to do, or if you're confused by all this information that's being thrust at you, now's the time to talk about it. So I'd like to have an open dialogue with you. I'd like to try and establish what we're really trying to do, and oversimplify it maybe, but break it down to what is really expected of us. So one of the things we talked about this morning as staff is the fact that maybe we'll do a bus tour. We'll identify in each of these segments a center that we go and look at as a group. And we look at it through everybody's sets of eyes, because everybody's going to look at it differently. Somebody may look at it where the proximity is to the residential areas. Somebody may look at it from a proximity of how high is it. Somebody may look at it, is it the right kind of general area that it should be in, or should it be someplace else? So it would be nice to put everybody maybe in the same position where we all got together, as many of us as possible, so that we could look at this with a joint kind of venture look. Let me oversimplify something for you. If Bob was a developer and he wanted to build a center, what would he look for? Where would he want to put it? What he'd be interested in putting in there? If he developed it and he didn't have tenants in there, it obviously would do him no good. But if he puts it in an area that he thinks is going to draw tenants for XYZ, but he can't get tenants to satisfy that need, what does he do? Should it be big? Should it be little? Should it be on the street? Should it be back? Should the parking be in front? Should it be behind? Those are the kind of questions that really I think we have to answer. From our perspective, what should it look like? Now, there is no homogenized one-size-fits-all, because depending upon where it goes, depending upon the adjacencies to it, it's going to obviously have an impact on what kind of a center you have, how large it is, how small it is. But that's one of the things we should be looking at. So when we go out and when we look at these centers, we want to look at them with a critical eye. Does the center really fit in? 30 years ago when that center was developed, maybe it was great for the area, but does it fit anymore? The other thing that was interesting that we talked about this morning too is the fact that we really don't have a lot of opportunity at this point to put in a lot of new centers. A lot of what we're going to do is be looking at how do you redevelop the centers. What do you do with the existing centers as they become vacant? God knows at this point there's a lot of consolidation going on in retail. There's probably going to be a lot of space that's going to come available over the next couple of years just in retail by itself, let alone services. Did you read the article in the paper today about Eastern Hills Mall? Interesting concept. But you know something? In Boston, Massachusetts, suburban Dedham, Legacy Place is there. When you walk into Legacy Place, it's a completely different concept. There's parking in the center, but it's walkable, completely walkable. There's a Whole Foods there. There's a bank there. There's a drugstore there. There's an LL Bean there. There's so many different things, but guess what? In all of this, there's also housing too. When we're looking at some of this stuff, that's the other thing we've got to consider too, density. Is that a dirty word? To a lot of people it is, because when you talk about density, there's a perception that we all of a sudden have in our mind, because guess what? We've built some density in Amherst that very frankly is not that physically attractive. So you may look at something in some particular fashion and say, gee, that doesn't look good. And if you had the chance and you were developing it, maybe you would have done it different. But density is a good thing if it's done the right way. So how does density enter into this too? When you're looking again, if we take this tour and we look at, and we start looking at centers, is there an opportunity in an existing center maybe to improve that center by adding density to it? Maybe it's only 1 story high, maybe it should be 2 stories high if it's redeveloped. 2 stories high, 3 stories high, mixed use. So there's a lot of questions that we can answer, but don't get bogged down in some of this other stuff, okay? Don't get bogged down in all this technical stuff, okay? We have a technical committee that'll work out the technical pieces of it. The technical pieces are really not ours, okay? So we're looking at it from a standpoint, what do you see? If you had your druthers, what would you rather have? How does it fit into what you currently see? Questions? Comments?
I'm trying to get clear in my own mind. We have a current zoning code. Then we have different areas, many different areas of the town. Our zoning code is going to be area-specific for a certain area, like Eggertsville would be different than the Swarmville area. Are we looking towards changing our zoning code so it identifies certain areas of the town and what the zoning would look like in those areas?
How about if I... It's on? I think I can answer that question. We'll be providing new tools in the zoning code, and some of the tools that are in there now will probably go away, and they will be specific. There'll be recommendations for where specifically those tools would be applied. So the implication is that the zoning map would be modified. That's going to be a decision that's going to have to be made by the town board. But this committee is going to make that recommendation as to what the tools are and where those tools need to be applied. And then they will take it on and make a final decision as to whether or not you're going to implement that.
And part of the discussion this morning was on that, too. And again, I'll oversimplify from my perspective, okay, as a layperson's perspective. And maybe I know just enough to be dangerous because I'm on the planning board, okay? And these two guys, the same thing from being on ZBA. But, and these two guys from being a planning board, too, and a developer besides. But the fact of the matter is, when we're looking at this, I would like to think that maybe we should look at it with regardless of what the zoning is currently. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about what it really is today. Worry about more how it fits into tomorrow. And then, you know what? Once we decide we'd like to do this, or where we think we should go with it, we give it back to the experts. And we make them work on it. Code Studio, that's what they're getting paid for. And they develop it to be able to present it to you as a town board member and say to you, okay, these changes are going to have to be made. Can it be homogenized? No. I mean, we're so deeply entrenched in who we are today that it's going to be difficult to change it wholesale, but we can look at it in a different fashion and how we want to see it going forward. And hopefully that's what's going to happen here. It will take us forward.
So, I look at this, I just want to be clear what we're talking about. We're talking about not making wholesale changes, but in some of these districts, if you look at where we're talking about a district and what's called out in the comprehensive plan as having a district, you get into the district and the zoning's schizophrenic, right? It's like, just take the Snyder area. It's a 2-block area. You've got 11 different districts, you know, and it's great. The zoning does a great job of making sure that stuff tries not to be, that everything fits, right? So if you had a gas station, hey, it's zoned for, motor services, it happens to be locked within this, next door to an NB, next door to an MS. I mean, I think that we do need to talk about blowing out some of those districts and coming across with a single, character content moment. And if something becomes non-compliant, who cares, right? I mean, that's one of those decisions that if you're going to plan for the future and you're going to plan with zoning, you have to a certain degree, be able to say, if it's going to be non-compliant, we're going to live with it. And we're going to live with the consequences, and that means that any additions and stuff are going to come to the zoning board, okay. But, if you've got a mobile gas station sitting inside of a Main in Harlem, inside of the Snyder area, and you're calling that a traditional business district, or the comp plan refers to that as a mixed-use district, that's not the highest and best use for that land. So, there is a certain amount of complete expulsion I think we're going to have to consider.
So let me ask you a question, though, because that brings up something else that's interesting. So today, it would be non-conforming.
Well, today it's conforming.
Well, right, but non-conforming from the standpoint as what we would like it to look like.
Right.
Okay. So conceptually, it's not exactly what we'd like it to look like. Do you plan for the future so that if that gas station goes away, you compel somebody to put something else there?
I think you have to. And you've got to take a little bit of a bet on your economic prowess and the fact that people are going to want to develop in this area. And you say, okay, if you're going to develop, you're going to play by this set of rules. David will know from doing work in the village that, you know, sometimes those rules can be a little too restrictive, but usually, you know, those rules set a tone. In the case of a project in Maine and Rhinewald, they ended up needing a variance to keep it at single story, but the rest of the character content followed. Maybe the parcel was too small to fit that MU, but I think that you have to, at some point, say, okay, you know, this business has been around for a long time, perhaps. We might even know business owners. We might know the property owner. At the end of the day, if they're going to change ownership or change use, we want them to do something totally different.
To address the nonconformity issue, the idea of taking a lot of the districts and molding them into fewer districts with a broader range and bigger area is fine. I don't think we need to chase away what becomes nonconforming, but what would help is if the code or the plan is very specific about why 2 or 3 districts got melded into one and the intent for some of the specific areas. Because I don't think we want everything that becomes non-conforming to go away.
Eventually you do. And, I mean, we have to recognize the vested right that is inherent to any landowner. I mean, just because you change the zoning doesn't take their rights away.
Right.
They can continue, they can sell it, but, I mean, we have to have a vision for what we want in a geographic area, and the only way you can implement that vision is through zoning. So if you're going to place someone in a non-conforming status, they have a right to continue perpetually, but at some point in time, through attrition, you want them to, you know, meet our vision. So
But will we leave some commercial areas in town that are not mixed use and not at a walkable scale? We still are a suburban town, and like it or not, we still are an auto-oriented. The pattern was established as an auto-oriented town.
I agree.
don't think we can chase everything away.
I'm not saying we should chase anything away. I'm just saying that right now we're only looking at activity centers. We're not looking at the town in its entirety. So I think it makes sense.
We're looking at all the commercial centers.
But, you know, looking at our zoning law, I think we have too many districts to begin with.
I agree.
And we continue to try to shape development in these little pigeonholes. And I don't see the necessity of doing that. I mean, just looking at the matrix, we see that the majority of the land uses are in the GB district. So the market's already telling us that they want to be in a district that allows multiple uses. So, and I think we'll see that happening as this plays out. We'll have less districts, I hope.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question, and this is to make you think. 20 years from now, are we going to be as automobile-orientated as we are today?
20 years from now, we'll be looking at another comp plan and code.
Could be, but in the meantime, it would be nice if we had the foresight to be able to look a little bit ahead and look at what's happening. And Lee talked about this, okay? When you look at some of these other towns that have moved forward in a more timely fashion than maybe we have at this point, okay? Not casting aspersions on anybody, but just saying that some towns have reacted a little differently and they've done some stuff. They've looked at some centers, they've looked at some public transportation needs. These are things, I mean, we're going to be doing the analysis with the NFTAs coming up shortly too, okay? That's going to be looking at the availability of public transportation and extending light rail or whatever way they're going to do it. But as we're doing all this, okay, if we can look a little bit down the road, will we continue to be as automobile-orientated going forward? Or do we have to find a way to become less dependent upon it and a little more open to doing some things a little differently? Just throwing it out there.
I don't disagree that we should try to be less auto-oriented and that we should try to use public transit more and have walkable commercial areas. But to answer your first question, the low-density, single-family residential pattern is established. So I don't know how the overall pattern of the town can change much. We have to still consider.
Yeah, and we're certainly continuing to build single-family homes, but however, I again throw this out to you. People that are older, like myself, are starting to migrate into more density housing, okay, because we would like to be not as tied to our homes, not to worry about the grass and shoveling and all this other stuff and everything else. Younger people tend to be gravitating more, it appears as though, okay, and this is just my opinion, so disagree with me, please. But you look at what's happening in Buffalo. Lofts are going crazy, both for older people and also younger people, okay? I came out of an environment 15 years ago in a town in Massachusetts, okay, that would not allow residents in the residential units in downtown area, and they couldn't redevelop the town. And it was really going to pot. They changed the zoning, retail on the first floor, residents on the second floor, and the town exploded, absolutely exploded. So there's opportunity to do things like that, and again, some towns have looked forward and have done things like that. Should we be looking at some of that stuff? Is that something that we should be doing? So again, even though we are still developing single-family homes, even though we have great road systems, I mean, people that come here from out of town marvel at the fact that we have 4 lanes on Transit Road, Niagara Falls Boulevard, Maple Road, Sheridan Drive. They just can't believe how well-equipped we are to get around. But the whole theory has been for how many years? That's the way we were. Is that the way we want to continue to be? This is an opportunity maybe to look out and see some of these things going forward. And again, I'm going to go back to density. Is density a dirty word?
I got a microphone. I think maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in this. And I think one of the goals and objectives of this whole part of the program up until that charade is to try to come up with, take a hard look at different properties, see what isn't working, and then they can give us some opportunities to see what is working, and to try to find the right tools to put in the zoning ordinance to make that work, based on what we all as a community actually want. And that might require, ultimately, after the zoning ordinance is changed, to have some good hard look at the actual master plan and put some overlay districts and different things in there to implement some of those changes in the code. To get as specific as certain properties at this phase of the game until, what I would believe from the schedule sometime late in the year, we're really getting in a little bit deeper. The idea is for them to be able to take our ideas, put them into concepts that could create tools in the code based on heights, distances, setbacks, sizes of buildings, scale of structure, architectural features possibly even, that would make our visual objectives of what a community could look like and give us the tools to put that together.
You agree with that?
Yeah. We'll talk about height a little bit.
Sure.
In the early part of the analysis memo we got this week when we talk about the various districts, height is discussed, and in some places I got the impression that it's not just the allowed height or the number of stories that works, but it also goes hand in hand with the setbacks. If it's going to work or not in the lot width. But one question I have is if there's going to be a vertical mix of uses, are we going to be asked to consider even a taller maximum height for the benefit of mixed uses? And if we do that, then I think what we need to do is we're picking geographic areas to test. I think we need to be careful that where the tallest future development is separated from residential areas. So for every commercial activity center we have, there's a residential edge around there. And I don't think it can be uniform that the tallest structures can be on the outsides of those commercial areas, not without testing it in the charrette.
Right along those lines, I think that the issue isn't maybe necessarily the nucleus of the center as much as it is the transition spaces, right? How do we actually taper back to the residential? So it's the abutment that causes the challenge.
And I think from the public's perspective, that's going to be an issue.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's an issue when we see applications.
It's an issue already. We know that exists in the town. And it's, very frankly, it's one of the reasons why I think we're all here too, because we have to look at that, because we've had over the last how many years, between the planning board and the ZBA, we've gotten involved in this quite a bit. And the thing is that, unfortunately, there have been situations that we've put in from a legal standpoint that we've done some things that maybe we're not exactly proud of. But at the other hand, from a legal standpoint, that's the way the code was written, that's the way the whole thing is put down. I mean, you know, you guys have problems with that, we have problems with that. So that's one of the reasons why we're addressing all this. We've got to overcome some of those deficiencies. By the way, if we were smart enough 20 years ago, we wouldn't have those deficiencies today, maybe. What else? Do we understand basically what we're looking for? Frank?
I understand much better than you.
Do you? Okay, all right. I think that when we look at this and we listen to Lee, and I was a little critical of the guys this morning when we were having staff, and I said, you know, one of the things when I was in business that we all develop a jargon, and we all become, from whatever business that we're in, accustomed to speaking certain terms about certain ways. And when we get before the public, we've got to be careful not to continue to do that. And these guys know very well what they're doing and what they want to accomplish, and they do a great job. Lee is terrific. I don't know how many of you met Lee, but when he was here, if you had an opportunity to talk to him one-on-one, he's very, very bright. Colin is very bright, too. But they do get involved in talking about terms that a lot of people are not familiar with. I mean, you know, I've been on the planning for 5 years now, and I still sometimes say I have no idea what they're talking about. So, just to not to get so immersed into all these numbers and shopping center number 1, number 5, number 22, number 23, and GB, and all this other stuff, and just to go back and try to concentrate on what are we really looking at. I just didn't want to get off track. I wanted to make sure everybody was still on the same page. And we're okay? Okay, some good comments.
Just to clarify one thing, the project is looking at all commercial and mixed-use districts across the town. It's not just the centers. Okay. It just is a sort of how we got started with this. This is kind of an oversimplification and hopefully maybe summarizes some of the things we've been talking about. We identified that there's multiple districts in commercial areas, and there's a lot of GB out there. One of the problems we've got is that there's a lot of GB across the town. And GB, general business zoning, is trying to do too many things in too many places in too many different ways. For example, Consumer Square on Niagara Falls Boulevard, where Lowe's, Best Buy, and Target are located, the Hopkins, the Clearfield Plaza at Hopkins and Klein, and the neighborhood commercial at Main and Harlem are all predominantly the same districts. So you have this one set of zoning rules that applies to all kinds of different types of development. It has two effects. One is it allows everything that GB allows at every one of those locations where it's on the ground. So, actually, Clearfield Plaza is a good example because it's a decent-sized parcel. You could do a 65-foot building, and likely meet the setbacks and likely provide enough parking. And is a 65-foot building appropriate at Clearfield Plaza, which is surrounded by single-family homes? So it's obviously the zoning district that isn't going to fulfill the planning objective, which is to have a commercial development that fits into the context of the neighborhood. Yeah, Jerry.
I was just gonna say, so what you're really saying is that GB on Transit Road, and GB in Clearfield Plaza, and GB in Eggleston should be different.
They should all be different.
They can't be the same. I mean, that's the way I see where we're going here.
Right.
That we have a lot of these big zoning districts, and so like using GB, it says the same thing everywhere, but it really shouldn't be used the same way everywhere.
Right, or it shouldn't be GB everywhere.
It shouldn't be GB everywhere.
That's probably what the answer is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on one hand, GB permits forms of development that don't fit into the neighborhood in some locations. And in other places, a good example is Harlem and Maine, there's a lot of GB in Harlem and Maine. The setbacks don't work, the height doesn't work, nothing about it works. So somebody wants to do what the plan wants, what the community wants to see in that area. A developer would have to jump through all kinds of hoops and get variances and have uncertainty, delays, extra time and money to try and do the right thing. We could all sit in the room and agree that we want to see a particular type of building on a parcel, but the regulations don't permit it, so now we start jumping through a bunch of regulatory hoops. In the current code was developed in the mid-'70s, and it was at a time when town was a different place. It was mostly expanding. It was mostly greenfield development or development on vacant parcels and pushing out further and further. And we developed a code at that time that sort of took every development on its own and made it fit all the development around it, without thinking of how, if you actually have a neighborhood, how do all those districts work together? The example that Brian cited with multiple districts that weren't intended to be in a place like that in the first place, are all lumped together and produce different results on different parcels. So that neighborhood has to have its own zoning to make it fit into the neighborhood better. Just as Hopkins and Klein needs, that might be a good place where it's still probably going to have an auto-oriented bent to it, because a lot of people are going to be driving to Dashes or driving to the plaza. But maybe it's a little more pedestrian-oriented experience once you're there, and it works a little bit better to walk around the plaza itself, and to make it easier for the people that do live in close proximity to actually walk to the plaza. So that's one flavor that we probably have to develop. We have to develop the stuff for the Main and Harlem, Main and Eggert type areas. At the same time, we're probably not going to significantly change Consumer Square or the larger big box commercial on Transit. It kind of is what it is. That serves its role in the market. Amherst has a distinct role in the regional market for providing those type of retail services. That's not going to go away anytime soon. There might be better ways of doing it. There might be better ways of improving the aesthetics and just making it a more pleasing place to go to, but it isn't going to fundamentally change what it is. So the planning process, the comp plan side of this is going to show us, Consumer Square is a big box, auto-oriented regional shopping center, and it's going to have this set of rules. It should have this kind of design and regulations. Each of the individual centers are going to have their own set of rules and their own set of design guidelines to make it better fit into the neighborhood, better work with how that center is going to function in the future. So the plan tells us the generalities of what we want. Now and that's I think what the charrette's going to do, is say, we got these 5 or 6 areas that are pretty distinct in the town. They're kind of representative of a bunch of other areas like it around the town. So let's come up with how we want these to look, how we want them to relate to the neighborhood. And once we all agree on that, then they're going to go off and do the really riveting, exciting work of writing code to make that to actually write the rules to produce the design that the community agreed on.
But Gary, I can't help but think that each time we do something like this, and I don't remember when the last comprehensive plan was done, but it gets harder and harder to make all these changes.
It does.
Because, I mean, gosh, when I first started on the town board, they were saying, you know, Amherst is so fully developed. Well, it's a heck of a lot more years later, and we're more fully developed. And the more fully developed the town is, the harder it becomes to make the changes. So we can write whatever we want about what we'd like to see and how this neighborhood should look like this and this shopping center should look like that, but it's gonna take a heck of a long time to make these things happen.
Yeah, it's not easy. You're absolutely right. It doesn't get easier over time.
Well,
When
it
you're
gets
talk-
harder.
When you're talking redevelopment, it's that much harder because you're talking about an existing neighborhood and what people are used to or what they want to see. I think part of what the charrette is supposed to do and what this process is supposed to do is to try and get over that hump where there's more community buy-in and in the areas that we're going to be specifically looking at. So there is more of an agreement between property owners, the neighbors, and the community as a whole as to what that's supposed to look like. And if it really works, and if it really does develop a set of rules that better fit the neighborhood, then the neighborhood should be buying into it. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I had the benefit of participating in the comprehensive plan development, and I remember as the process went on for, 18 months to 2 years, at some point in the process, a particularly lively discussion was occurring amongst the committees, and I said, the buzzword at that time was smart growth, stop sprawl, smart growth. And the point was made that, okay, let's understand that what smart growth means is that we're redirecting development activity back into already established areas of the town. And we all know that change is disruptive. It's inevitable, but it's disruptive. And looking at some of the board members that were participating in those meetings saying, are you prepared several years from now to be able to make votes on projects that are changing the environment around people, what they've gotten used to for whatever number of years they've lived in that neighborhood? Because they can't all participate in this process. As much as they can, they're entitled to, they don't. And they react when something's coming into that area that they then have to kind of decide whether they like or not. But we're going down this path again. The difference is this time is that we're that much more developed, so there's not many more neighborhoods that we're impacting with change over what's there today. And we can look at that and say that some of these neighborhoods are critical commercial centers are in dire need of change. They need change. They're struggling. But nonetheless, that struggling center is still familiar to that area, and that change will come with folks that are very guarded about what that change is. So we want to be transparent, we want to be inclusive, we want to encourage people to participate, but we should be under no illusions that as a result of that process, Board Member Povich get an easy time when folks show up and say, why'd you do that? You were on that committee, why'd you do it? It's going to be hard, because change is hard on folks. They're used to seeing what they see, even if it's not the best it can be.
Yeah, good point. Couple of things, and it is complex. There's no doubt about it. And it becomes more complex every day, too. I don't think we ever have to worry about ZBA board going away. Unfortunately, there'll always be a need for it. A couple of housekeeping things. If anybody else has any comments? No? Okay. Not yet, Tom. The June meeting will probably be a road show. Okay? I say probably, okay. We'll probably try to go out. We'll probably try and look at some centers. We'll probably try and also give you some kind of a form similar to this, okay, so that you can look at the center and make comments on it, so that if we go to center number 2, you don't completely forget about what you saw in center number 1. You'll have something in writing. And more than likely, we will probably have a meeting in July, too, because actually, we're pushing back just a little bit on the schedule because of our conversation today of possibly going out and doing a review rather than asking you to go out and do it on your own, doing it all together, okay? On the meeting notes from last month, if you had an opportunity to look at them, unless there's something glaring that you'd like to have changed on it, I think that they looked fine to me. Anybody have any problems with the meeting notes from last month? Okay. If not, we'll open for public discussion now. Remember, we have a 3-minute time limit. Anybody want to come up and speak? Okay. Nobody wants to come up and speak, I guess that's good. I knew I could depend upon you.
An honor and a privilege. Thank you for these 3 minutes for public participation. My name is Thomas Frank, and I'd like to comment on the, as far as the speaker that was on, that gave the presentation. That was great, regarding the Niagara Falls Boulevard and Transit Road, as far as the extremes that, but he didn't mention the New York State Thruway. And, but also I like the fact that he mentioned like Clarence and Tonawanda, but we want to, as far as the plan for the downtown Main Street traffic mitigation design plan, for that to be in the comprehensive plan for the 21st century, dealing with the transportation, that as far as the GBNRTC, the Greater Buffalo Niagara Transportation Council, the PIN number 5900.20 for the NFTA Comprehensive TOD, the transit-oriented development, as far as the looking at the relocation of the thruway toll barrier, the access from Young's Road, but also to create a, and this stuff was all, we went through colloquies, soliloquies, charrettes and charades as far as the transit options for the Buffalo Amherst corridor, as far as the airport aspect, as far as the transit road, to turn that into a multimodal transportation hub, and relocating the thruway, the transit road barrier, and relocating and reconceptualizing the toll barrier in Clarence as a value added. We're looking at a 5-year, $50 million project that would convert the Travel Plaza into a visitor information center for the I Love New York and the Path Through History. And that this is, as far as the Main Street, that the Congress of New Urbanism, the picture Main Street, the one region forward, that this is an ongoing project.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to working with you over the next 5 years.
I hope you don't disappoint us that we have enough influence that we're able to move the tolls too. So, okay, Mr. Tricoli.
Jim Tricoli. Mr. Giuliani said we're all getting older, him and I and some other people. And I live in Williamsville, and I cannot walk to the hotel that Mr. Palladino put up, or the Hyatt, which another company put up. So it's not a walkable community in that sense. Now, when we do have empty stores, like right now, we had a place that used to sell pizza on Main and Garrison. That's been empty for about a year. It's a big space, no one's in there. Right across the street on Main and Garrison, that's been empty for 4 years. I've been trying to track down what has been submitted. The town said nothing to them because it's in the village. I talked to the village, and he said a long time ago they submitted something, but there's nothing submitted now. Okay, now, in your plan, is there any way to put some kind of pressure on owners who have empty stores? As you drive down Main Street, you see that lot on Garrison and Main, and overnight you see oil trucks there, you see tankers there. I just wrote a piece about that. That ground hasn't been tested by anybody. So how contaminated it could be? You know, there are things like that you have to start with, I think. In my village, in Maricopa's village, I think the mayor has great ideas. They're not my ideas, but I respect what he's doing. Thank you.
Name is Don Smith. I just first want to say there's some people here that have some great ideas, and I do say that you're trying really hard to work with a very difficult subject. But I want to point out a couple of things your committee is supposed to be doing. It will act as a surrogate for the larger community. That's in your public outreach plan. Provide overall policy direction. That's in your public outreach plan. Provide community perspectives. What I heard here tonight, in some of the statements I heard, we don't want to see certain types of type of development, Mr. Black. Well, who is the we we're talking about? Is it your perspective? You're people who deal with development. You have a perspective from the inside out. And you're trying to get something done from the inside out. This is a big town, 123,000 people. There's another way of looking at everything you're doing is from the outside in, from those 123,000 people. Everything you do will have a side effect, unintended and intended. And everything you think you know will not work, or there'll be problems with it. One of the weaknesses of this whole process is the way you're dealing with the public. You don't even publish any metrics on how much information or how many people attended. Based on the people attending here today, the 6 or 7 people, you're failing. Your public outreach plan needs to be worked and built a lot better than it is now, or what that outside-in view is going to fail, and you're going to fail the people of Amherst. So I'm hoping, and I understand it's not an easy job. You do your jobs looking at it one way. You've got to change perspective and have 2 ways of looking at what you're doing. You're a very important committee here, and frankly, you can't get it wrong. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm short enough, I have to move the mic. I just wanted to talk about the diversity that we have in Amherst. We have more urban areas. We have the Village, we have Snyder, we have rural areas up in the northern parts, we have more suburban parts. People live there because that's what they wanted. And I know we have different types of centers, and you're looking at that, but we shouldn't be changing just to change. If something's working, and maybe, for example, Clearfield, I think Clearfield's working. The problem is that we don't have the infrastructure for bikes. People walk there when they can. You know, sometimes the only choice is to drive somewhere if the infrastructure is not in place. So in some of these areas, you don't need higher density. You just need more infrastructure to facilitate people using it as pedestrians or for bike traffic. Or maybe we need more mass transit. Maybe that's the solution, instead of putting larger housing units where we don't need more housing units. I don't think we need more senior housing. I think more people are staying in their homes or going to patio homes, things like that. So do we need higher density? Maybe in some areas, not in others. So I hope you look at maybe what we need to make an area work versus just change for change.
Anybody else?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Zucala. I am here, strange enough, to keep a part of a promise, but I'm very glad I came here. I'm one of the board members for the Amherst Industrial Development Agency. And I came here expecting perhaps a slightly different meeting, but now that I understand a little bit more about what we're doing, I think it's important that what you folks do is reflected by the work of the AIDA, and I'm going to make an extra effort to attend these meetings as they go forward to make sure that we do coordinate, because I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.